should have Kreva, and we're asking the Eibishter for Shlema for all of the Chayalim that were wounded yesterday, and the Eibishter should watch over all of our Chayalim and all of our sisters and brothers living in Israel and give everybody the strength to get through this very, very, very difficult time. And that, like Goldie just said, it should be a Shnas Geula without Pshetlach immediately. We're delighted to wish Mazel Tov to our classmate Joni Tansky, who at this moment is at a bat mitzvah celebration for her grandson, Ascender Yehuda Tansky. Mazel Tov to Rachel Kaplan, who became a grandmother again twice this week, to two grandsons. To Daniela Wasserman's grandson, Shneur Zalman ben Chamadina, who started putting tefillin on today. To Vivi Darren, whose grandson became a chassan last week. And there should just be simchas for everyone. Happy, healthy simchas. And yeah, just the geula amitis v'hashlema immediately. The Sikha today on Chag HaSukkos. Aleph. Be'inyan hasimcha shebechag HaSukkos matzinu. Regarding the concept of joy on Sukkos, we find Shenoisav l'chiyuv hasimcha mitzad yesa Yom Tov b'chlal v'zman simchasenu b'miyuchad. That in addition to the fact that there is an obligation to be b'simcha because it's a Yom Tov, and that's true for every Yom Tov, and especially Zman Simchasenu, Sukkos. But in addition to that, Yesh gam sugei simcha hakshurim lepu'ulos misuyamis hanasis b'chag hasukkos. But there's also types of simcha that are connected to particular actions that took place and take place on Sukkos. There's hasimcha hashayeches lemitzvos and tilas daled minim b'chag zeh. There's the joy that is connected to taking the four kinds of vegetation on this Yom Tov. Kamesha Kasov, like it says in Parshas Emar, v'lekachtem lachem b'yam harishon gomer, u'semachtem lefnei Hashem elokechem shivas yamim. You should take these on the first day, etc., and you should rejoice before Hashem, your God, all 7 days. And this is understood in the Gemara as Simchas Lulav. Bahas Simcha, and then there's another kind of Simcha. So there's the default Simcha of Yom Tov. Then there's the overlay of this being Zman Simcha Seinu specifically. On top of that, there's the Simcha of the Daled Minim, Simchas Lulav. And then Bahas Simcha Hakshurim Nisuch Hamayim. And then there is the Simcha that is connected to the water libations, to the pouring of the water over the Mizbeach in the Beis HaMikdash. Shechein she'ivas hamayim shahayu menaschim b'sukkos al gabe hamizbeach v'hayu shoyivim oisam balayla shlofnei hanisuch haisa b'simcha. The drawing of the water that was poured during Sukkos on top of the Mizbeach, but that was drawn the night before the pouring, was also done with particular joy. And this is connected to the pasuk in Yeshayahu, "Ush'aftem mayim bisasa mimayne hayeshua," and you will draw forth waters in joy from the wellspring of salvation, which is exactly what we need to do immediately now. So the Rebbe asks, "Mahu seder beis machos elu?" What is the order in which these activities that precipitated a very specific type of joy were done? Which came first? Hadavor kashur v'tolui b'machlekes tanoim. So deciphering this is connected to and dependent on a debate amongst the Tanoim. Bizman haschalos nisuch hamayim. There's a debate in the Gemara about when did the pouring of the water begin. L'chad man da'amar tchilas nisuch hamayim ha'isa b'yom hasheni d'chag ha'sukkos b'shachris. according to one opinion, according to one of the Tanaim, the water pouring on the Mizbeach was done on the second day during Shacharis, Ulafizeh, and so in line with this opinion, She'ivas hamayim b'pam harishona haisa b'layla hasheni. So, since the water was always drawn the night before it was poured, so if the water was poured for the first time on the Mizbeach the second day, then the water was drawn the second night of Yom Tov, which would mean la'achar zman netilas daled minim shahaya b'yom harishon. This would mean that they took the daled minim first, and then only later that evening would they draw the water. Avol, however, ha'halacha hi kedas hashniya. But the halacha is in accordance with the second opinion, shenisach hamayim kol shiva gam b'yom harishon, that the pouring of the water all 7 days of Sukkos included the first day of Sukkos. Therefore, v'nimtza sheshivas hamayim shekoydem hanisach harishon heisa balayla harishon shel hachag. So this would mean then, in accordance with this second opinion, which becomes the halacha, that the drawing of the water, which has to precede the pouring of the water, happened during the first night of the Chag. This would mean lifnei netilas daled minim shemitzvasa bayim. This would mean that this came before the first time that they took the daled minim, because you could only do the daled minim during the day. Okay, so the Rebbe brings down both opinions. He tells us which one is embraced as the halacha, but in Seif Beis, he asserts, and we are familiar with this from the Rebbe's Torah, klal hu b'Torah. It's an axiom. It's a rule. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. These and these are the words of the living God. Umizem muvan. And from this, it's understood sheberuchnius yesh makam lebeis hadeyes. That spiritually, even though la halacha, only one of these opinions can be effectuated, but spiritually, there's room for both of these opinions. Gam ledeya sheshivas hamayim hechela belel bei shel chag, including the opinion that the drawing of the water began on the second night of Yom Tov. Yisera mizu, and even more, gam lefi halacha sheshivas hamayim iskayma gam belel rishon shel chag, and even in accordance with the opinion which is embraced by halacha, that the drawing of the water occurred on the first night of the Yom Tov. Harei shleimus hasimcha de simchas beis hasheva hasimcha yisera shenifala al yidei hachalil uklei hashir ischila rak b'matzah Yom Tov harishon. But the completion of the simcha that has to do with simchas beis hasheva of drawing the water, the extra dimension of simcha that was introduced through the instruments, that only started b'matzah Yom Tov harishon, on the second night. And even though you might say that seemingly this is a side thing, it's tangential. It's like the Gemara says, Aryehu dirivia alei. It's like a lion that's crouching or hovering above it. In other words, it doesn't change the facts. It doesn't change the essential concept, but it's like being blocked by something else. That playing instruments doesn't, let's just say that Shabbos and Yom Tov don't yield to the playing of instruments. So in other words, you're going to say, okay, so it's a technical thing that there's a Simcha Yisera. It's like you can't access what the lion is crouching over or hovering over, because the lion's a formidable creature and you can't start up with it. But the Rebbe says, D'mahai taima. But for this very reason, hine bizman hazeh, kishasimchas beis hasheva eina kshurim achalil. Today, when the Simchas Beis HaSheva is not connected to the instrumental component, Yesh Leimar, K'moshen is bar kama pa'amim, we might say, as has been explained a number of times, Shal kalkalasenu zuhi takanasenu, that our very kalkala, the way in which something has gone awry, is actually a way in which something is fixed, meaning Simchas Beis HaSheva matchila b'kamen yonim b'teifkav gadol from halayla harishon shel Sukkos, that in a way, somewhat paradoxically, because today we don't have the Beis Hamikdash and the instrumental component is not like halachically part of it, so we could start having the complete Simchas Beis HaSheva even on the first night of Sukkos. Afal pikein, still in all, since everything in Torah is exact, move on. So we have to understand that since the extra dimension of Simcha in the Beis Hamikdash started b'matzah Yom Tov Harishain, because it was only then that you could introduce the instrumental component. So it's because that is more fitting for this simcha. That not just technically, because now you can introduce instruments, but that conceptually and essentially, the true and complete simcha of Simchas Beis HaSheva, even if it starts the night before, only crescendos and can only be present beginning with Matzah Yom Tov Harishon. Gimel, v'yuvan, and we'll understand this more deeply, and we'll be able to appreciate this more deeply, b'hakdim, by prefacing biur hashayches b'pnimius hinyonim denisuch hamayim l'chag HaSukkos dafka. We have to understand on the deeper level the connection between the water libations, pouring water, to Chag HaSukkos dafka. Echad hachilukim shebein simchas nisuch hayayin de'ein oimrim shira el al hayayin ubein hasimcha de nisuch hamayim hu. So on a regular basis, there was nisuch hayayin on the mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash. There were wine libations. And the Rebbe says that one of the differences between the pouring of wine and regarding wine, the Gemara tells us that you don't say shira except for on wine, that there's an inherent connection between wine and simcha. Nevertheless, on Sukkos, we do the water libations. And what's the difference between nisuch hayayin ubein hasimcha de nisuch hamayim? The simcha of pouring wine and the simcha of pouring water. The Rebbe says the difference is hasimcha de nisuch hayayin yesh la kesher gam leteva ha'adam. In the joy that comes from pouring the wine, it's intuitive to a human being. How so? We could see this from the fact that in general, wine gladdens the heart. That's just a property of wine, that it causes joy. Klamar, this is to say, it's true that when you were pouring the wine on the Mizbeach, nobody was drinking the wine. Nobody was ingesting the wine. It was all done for a holy purpose. It was an avodah in the Mikdash. But still, there's a more intuitive connection between us and wine than there is between us and water. And the Rebbe deepens this point in the brackets here, al derech mitzvah simchas Yom Tov. And we see in halacha that when it comes to the simcha of Yom Tov, shetzricha liskayin biyayin kipshutei, that part of it is just practically simply drinking wine. Ein simcha ela biyayin. So much so that we have this assertion that there's no simcha except for when you have wine. Move on. It's understood. Sheshtias hayayin shel ish Yisrael ein l'shem taiva chas v'shalom. And it's understood that when a yid drinks wine, it's not because of lust, kiyum l'shem kiyum hamitzvah, but it's rather for the purpose of observing a mitzvah. Therefore, gam hasimcha haba k'teitzah mizeh ein mitzad hayayin atzmai k'mei etzel ein Yehudi. So the simcha that the Jew derives from drinking the wine is not from the wine itself, like it would be by a pedestrian person, ella mitzad ha-mitzvah shebezeh, simcha shel mitzvah. But the joy is derived because of the mitzvah that is connected to drinking the wine. V'yaser mizu shtiyas hayayin hi ha-mitzvah. And it's the drinking of the wine is the mitzvah. For those who have recently reviewed the iconic Sikha of the Rebbe on Chana, Tfilas Chana. So you see this theme. The Rebbe says there that then when a Yid cries during an Asana Teikif, he's crying from the Etzem HaNeshama that he wants to fulfill the Eibishter's Ratzin of Nisavala Yisbar Dir B'Tachtainim. He's not crying because of his own life. He's crying because he wants what the Eibishter wants. So the Rebbe is saying here the same theme, that the simcha that comes from drinking wine comes from the fact that it's a mitzvah. Yisrael him goy echad ba'aretz. Jews are a singular nation upon the earth. Hainu shegam mitzad haguf hagashmi aretz hareim goy echad. So the Rebbe takes the word aretz and teaches it artzius, materiality, corporeality, that mitzad the guf, the physical guf, a Jew is goy kadosh. He's goy echad. He's singular and unparalleled. Umizem move on. From this is understood shegam hasimcha sheguf Yisrael margish b'matzav zu. So the simcha, that the very bodily simcha, okay? So the way in which wine interacts with our chemical properties and causes people to feel elevated, more expensive, whatever it is, mikayra be'emes mehakdusha v'hamitzvah shebiyayin. In truth, the source of these very physical feelings come from the holiness and the mitzvah that is in the wine. Va'afal pikein. Nevertheless, ma'achar shasimcha kshurim yayin davka ein simcha ela b'yayin. Va'atam b'pshat ha'torah kayayin b'tiv oy ma'er simcha. Nevertheless, after the simcha is connected with the wine dafka, because the Gemara says ein simcha ela b'yayin. And the simple explanation is that wine has properties that arouse joy. Move on. It's understood. Shahasimcha b'shemitzad mitzvah yesh la shaychos leteva u'matzias ha'olam teva hayayin. So from one hand, the Rebbe is saying that what you feel from drinking wine is coming from your etzem neshama, and at the same time, the Rebbe is saying, but on the very physical, simple level, there's intuitive connection between wine and joy, period. Masha Enkein, a contradistinction has simcha kshurim nisacha mayim al gabe mizbeach, but the joy that flows or is connected to the pouring of water on top of the mizbeach, v'mayim b'tivim einam davar misameach, and water is not naturally something that precipitates joy. Meira shehasimcha shebeshivas hamayim ein la shaychus l'nyane hateva. So the water libations signals and teaches that the simcha that's connected to this is completely divested of in Yane Hateva, of natural things. And the joy that accompanies the pouring of the water comes only from the fact that this is a commandment of Hashem. And this is what gives the Nisuch Hamayim the edge over the Nisuch Hayayin. This is what makes it greater and singular. B'nisuch hayayin kevon shasimcha yesh la'achiza b'teva habriya, harehi medudo u'mekbelas lefi ha'agbola shel teva habriya. Because wine has a natural association, we jive with it, we vibe with it, we resonate with it, it makes us happy, we get it. So because it's connected to us, it is naturally constrained by our limitations because it has something to do with teva. But when you're talking about the water libations, because here we're talking about a completely transcendent simcha that comes only from the tzivoi, the commandment of Hashem, shehu ein seif, and the Eibishter is infinite. So then the simcha that flows from this is also beyond any type of parameters and metrics and measures and borders. There's no way to measure it. It's immeasurable. It's transcendent. Dalet. Mivur v'yadua, it's explained and it's known, shebechol echad ve'echad miYisrael yeshna mizbeach ruchani, that within every Jew there is a spiritual mizbeach, a spiritual altar. Ulefi zeh muvan, and so based on that, it's understood, shebei zoifane hasimcha denisach hayayin v'nisach hamayim al gabei mizbeach yeshnam gam kein ba'avoda haruchani shel kol echad miYisrael. So just like there were these two avodas, there was the avodah of Nisach Hayayin and there was avodah of Nisach Hamayim in the Beis Hamikdash, so too these two avodas exist internally in our avodah. Hasimcha the Nisach Hayayin b'avodas ha'adam inyana simcha shel mitzvah haba al yedei his beinunus b'seichel. So the way this manifests internally is that the inyan of Nisuch Hayayin, of pouring wine on the Mizbeach, manifests in the simcha that we get through contemplating the mitzvah through our cognition. Using our seichel to meditate and contemplate and understand the mitzvah, right? Like tam means reason, and it also means taste, because the more you understand the reason, the more you have a taste for doing it. When a Jew contemplates and ruminates on the great merit that we have, that the Eibishter gave us the possibility to do a mitzvah, and when we contemplate the great elevation that is effected through the observance of these mitzvahs, that through a mitzvah we become connected with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that we cleave onto Him, this arouses a great simcha by the Jew. But on the other hand, the other side of this is that since this simcha is connected with our seichel and with our contemplation, harehi ba'ofen kazeh shemorgeshes ba noisef al mitzvah gam mitziusoy shel ha'adam hamekayim es hamitzvah. Because we're contemplating, because we're taking joy in the fact that we can be part of this awesome relationship. So in addition to the simcha, the mitzvah, there's also the me, there's the we, there's our feelings. There's mitziusoi shela adam. There's the existence of the person that's mekayim the mitzvah. And the Rebbe says in parentheses, this is bidugmas hasimcha haba mishtiyas yayin kanal. And this is in line with, or let's just say that the taste we have for wine and the pleasure that we get from drinking wine is a metaphor for the pleasure we get from contemplating on our ability to do mitzvahs. And in both cases, there's the me, there's the we, there's our pleasure. And because the simcha is combined with intellectual grasp, so then, naturally, it's going to be limited based on the cognitive abilities of whichever person is contemplating this. So that's the good news and the bad news. That's the maila and that's the chasar. Masha Enkein, in contradistinction, hasimcha shebenisuch hamayim, he dugma lesimcha shel mitzvah shel maila misechel vizbaininus. The simcha that comes from pouring the water is like the simcha that comes from a mitzvah that transcends our seichel and our ability to contemplate. Kasher Yehudi oimed betnua shel mesiras nefesh, shemeiser es atzmai legamer leKadosh Baruch Hu. When a Jew is in the mode of mesiras nefesh, he gives himself over, he imparts himself completely to Kadosh Baruch Hu. Ein hu niskak l'hasbara b'seichel eides goydel ha'ilu shel hamitzvos. So he's not relying on, and he doesn't need the machinations of his seichel about the greatness of the Sukkos and the elevation of doing mitzvahs. Miyad b'shamay shezeu tzivui shel Kadosh Baruch Hu v'tzivanu ma'ir hadavar etzlei simcha gedola. As soon as he hears that this is what Hashem wants, it arouses in him a great joy. So he doesn't have to contemplate and ruminate and make all kinds of cheshbonos about how great the Ilui is going to be, etc. The simcha zu, and this simcha that flows from mesiras nefesh without cheshbonos, without seichel, he simcha amitis. This is the true simcha. She'ein la shum hagbala. There's no limit and there's no limitations. Because this simcha reaches the essence of the soul, which is higher than any external manifestations. And so it's specifically about this inyan, the nisuch hamayim, that Chazal say in Gemara Sukkah, if you didn't see the simcha of Beis HaSha'eva, of drawing and pouring the water, you never saw simcha in your life. Hey. V'zuhi gam hashaychas haklalos to simchas Beis HaSha'eva l'chag Sukkos. And this is also the general connection between the simchas Beis HaSha'eva and Chag HaSukkos. HaSimcha de Sukkos, man simchasenu, ba min ha'avoda v'hinyanim shenif'alu b'Rosh Hashanah u'v'Aseres Yimei Tshuva u'befrat b'Yom HaKippurim. The simcha of Sukkos, of Zman Simchasenu, comes from the avoda of what was done and affected on Rosh Hashanah during the Aseres Yimei Tshuva, and specifically at Yom Kippur. Ukiyadua, and as is known, sheschach hasukkah, that the schach of the sukkah, shemikarim me anani hakavod, that the source for putting the schach is the anania covered in the midbar, the clouds of glory. The schach nimshach mehatshuva ume'anan hakteres de Yom Kippurim. It flows forth spiritually from the tshuva and from the cloud of the incense offering of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. Ha'avodah de Yom Kippurim, the spiritual service of Yom Kippur, which is referred to in the Torah, and Chassidus has a lot to say about Achas Bashana. It's once a year. It's unparalleled. It's unreplicated. Hi mitzad hayechida shebenefesh. It all flows from the revelation and the exposure of the highest level of the neshama, which only happens on Yom Kippur. Hahiskasha shel etzem haneshama im atzmusa yizbarech. It's about the connection of the essence of the soul with the essence of Hashem. Yechida liyachdach. Our Yechida to the Yechida of Hashem, as it were. Kavyachol. V'achidush de Sukkos. And so what's the novelty of Sukkos? She'oisa heskashrus l'kadosh baruch hu nimsheches begolui. That this connection is drawn forth in a revealed manner ad shehi makifas adam kuloi ubechol inyanav, until it completely surrounds the person and everything connected to the person. You know, people always make jokes about how the Yom Tovim should be spread out. You know, there's too many. We could put some in Tishrei, some in Cheshvan, or I don't know, Tevis. I mean, but when we understand, you know, this is all of one cloth. It's one avodah. It's one uninterrupted avodah. The davar zeba, except we have to interrupt to make some more pasta, but really it's one uninterrupted avodah. The davar zeba l'dei bitui gam b'mitzvah sukkah kipshuta, and this expresses itself in the mitzvah of sukkah kipshuta. Simply speaking, b'sukkos teishvu shivas yamim. The Torah says you should sit in a sukkah 7 days. The Gemara says, Teishvu ke'ein taduru. What does it mean you should dwell? It means you should live. You should do everything there. Kol ha'inyanim sha'isa adam beveisai achila shtiya v'chulei mukafim v'nichlalim b'mitzvahs hasukkah. Everything that a person does in his house, eating, drinking, etc., are surrounded and are included in the mitzvah of sukkah. Shezehu ha'hisafa v'hamayla shebesukkah legabe talis. And this is a higher level makif, or a more expansive level of makif, that is a talis. That is also the inyan of a makif. Ha-talis mechasa es ha'adam roishe v'rubai. The talis covers the person, his head, and most of his body. V'ilu hasukkah makifa games kol inyane adam leloi kol hagbalos. And the sukkah encircles and encompasses and includes everything having to do with the person. And there are no really limitations on this everything that's included. V'lachein. Therefore, Chag HaSukkos uzman nisuch hamayim v'simchas beis ha'she'eva. And therefore, it's Chag HaSukkos that was chosen as the time for the Nisuch HaMayim, for the special Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, Shehi Simcha Shelamayla Mitam Vadas. Because just like the Sukkah encompasses the person, Balim, Gvulim, everything having to do with the person, so too the inyan of Nisuch HaMayim, which the Rebbe explained earlier in Seif Dalid, is this inyan of Simcha Shelamayla Mitam Vadas. There's no hagbalas, there's no limitations. Chag HaSukkos ma'eres HaSimcha Shelamayla Mimitita v'hagbala. Sukkos arouses a joy that transcends limitation and parameter. Vav. Now, the Rebbe is going to go back. So he explained a little bit about the simcha of Nisuch HaMayim. Now the Rebbe is going to explain the other cause for simcha, the additional cause for simcha and Sukkos, which has to do with the Daled Minim. Vav, the Rebbe says, Yadua, it's known, shemitzvahs halulav eina mitzvah b'fnei atzma b'teichna, that the mitzvah of the Daled Minim, or mitzvahs lulav, is not a freestanding mitzvah, essentially, conceptually. It's not that it's a independent mitzvah. It just happens to be that the time to do this mitzvah is during the days of Sukkos. No. The Daled Minim are an outgrowth of Yom Tif, Sukkos, not independent of it. Kemuvan gam min hadin, and this is also reflected in the halacha shemitzvahs netilasa delulav b'sukkah hu mitzvah min hamufchar. That the best way to do the mitzvah of the Daled Minim is to do it dafka in the sukkah. Hasukkah mechila b'toiches adam al kol inyonav. The sukkah encompasses within it the person and all of their aspects. Ba'ofen shel b'lashon hachasidus makif mibachutz. It encircles or encompasses the person in Hasidic terminology in a way of makif, surrounding and encompassing from the outside. And what's the novelty of the mitzvah of taking the Daled Minim? Is v'lakachtem lachem. See, the truth of the matter is that there are all kinds of attempts to explain the seemingly extraneous word. Because v'lakachtem means you should take. So what does it mean, v'lakachtem lachem? You should take to you. So in halacha, we learned that it has to belong to you, that you can't bench Daled Minim on somebody else's, or stolen, or used without permission, etc. But al pi chasidus v'lakachtem lachem means lakachas v'litol es hamakiv shel hasukah lachem. Al pi chasidus, the word lachem is teaching that you should take the transcendent, all-encompassing lights and energies of Sukkos, and you should bring it into yourself, lachem. Shelachem, it should be yours. Hainu sheyumshach bepnimius, that it should be incorporated in your inwardness. Shouldn't be something that just encompasses you and affects you from the outside, but rather it should become part of your fiber and your being. V'zehu hatam, and this is the reason shabenatilas Daled Minim, that when you take the Daled Minim and you do the na'anuim, the minhag is tzarech sheyagiu el halev, that you take it and you shake it in the different directions, but you always bring it back to the heart. It has to reach the heart. In order that this bringing of the makif into the pnimi should flow into the feelings of the heart. V'liga polig l'chol shaifin, and the heart distributes the vitality to all of the limbs. V'chol ha'koiches sheb'chol eivarim, koilel ha'seichel shebareish. The heart distributes the vivifying factor to all of our subsidiary aspects of the body, including the seichel in our head. V'dafka al yidei zeh, and it's specifically this way that inyan hasukkos gilui hamakiv hu b'shleimus. That what has to happen on Sukkos, which is that all the hamshachas and all the avodah of Rosh Hashanah, the Seretz Tshuva, and the Yom Kippur has to come ba'ofen makiv. This brings the shleimus, the completion, to this. Although it's true that any avodah that's done with our koiches, with our innermost koiches, is always going to be limited, as said above. And therefore, it's necessary to introduce the avodah mesiras nefesh, which transcends seichel. And that's why you have the mile of nisuch hamayim legabe nisuch hayayin. And that's the greatness of the water libations over the wine libations. Mikol Makaim, still and all, Shleimus avoided the Mesiras Nefesh, he kasher habitul b'Mesiras Nefesh, Chaydrim el Teich HaKeiches HaPnimiyim, HaSeichel v'Amidas. But still and all, with all of the deficits and the weakness, you could say, of our inherent limitations, still and all, it's necessary that the Mesiras Nefesh, that everything that's transcendent should suffuse and permeate all of our keiches, including our seichel and our midas. Kach she'inyan Mesiras Nefesh mischayiv gam mitzidam, so that the inyan Mesiras Nefesh becomes something that you understand is obligatory with your seichel and with your midas. Why? Ki aleph dafka al yidei zeh nikletes hatnor de Mesiras Nefesh be'adam bepnimiyusay umemela yesh la kiyum, because it's only in this way that the modality of Mesiras Nefesh becomes incorporated within the person, and so it will have lasting power there. And also, secondly, Zuhi Raya Laheder Hagbala Shalabitel Bamasiras Nefesh, She'ain Shum Mokim Benefesh Shaloi Higiu Elav Pala B'Teiche. And this actually is the definitive proof that you're talking about Mesiras Nefesh that has no Hagbala, it has no limitation. You're talking about Bittul that has no limitation. Why? Because it can permeate and it can infiltrate in every part of the person, including their seichel and their midas. In other words, this is a push-pull in Chassidus over and over and over again. From one side, what we do with our, avodah mitzad atzmai is by definition going to be limited. And it's by definition going to be adulterated by our sense of being. We are doing this. So on one hand, it lacks the infinity and it lacks the purity. On the other hand, the only way for it to be lasting and the only way for it to really be infinite is if it infiltrates the very limited spaces of our heart and our mind. And this is something that the Rebbe drives home over and over and over in Sichos, that the definition of infinity is that it can be found within finitude. If finitude is a whole, if it in any way serves as a border or as something that infinity cannot infiltrate, then it's not true infinity. True infinity is only seen and maybe even supremely showcased as it suffuses and permeates finitude. And the Rebbe speaks about nisim that are l'mayla mehaseichel, and then there's a higherness that's within teva. That's even a higherness. Zion. Al pikol anal, so based on everything above, yuvan gam hatama pnimi, will now understand the inner dimension shel hadeya shesheivas hamayim biyachad im simchas beis hasheva matchila b'layla hasheni shel Sukkos la'achri netilas daled minim. So now we can understand on a deeper level the reason for the opinion that the drawing of the water, which comes with a special type of simcha, begins on the second night of Sukkot after the Jew has already taken the Daled Minim. Kishem sheshleimus havodah demesiras nefesh bechlal nefeles al yidei zeh shehatnua demesiras nefesh nimsheches v'chayderes el toicha koiches hapnimiyim. Just as spoken above in Seif Vav, the Rebbe explained that the avodah of Mesiras Nefesh generally is effectuated through Mesiras Nefesh as it flows into and permeates the koiches hapnimiyim of a person. Kainhu, and remember that the Daled Minim is about taking the makif and bringing it pnimi. Kainhu v'alachas kama v'kama b'negei l'simcha shetzricha l'voy al yidei avodah zu. So it is with the simcha, and much more so, that has to come about through this avodah. Dema'achar asher aleph his ayis hasimcha hidafka midavar hamorgush bigoloi. First of all, simcha comes from something that is felt in an open and manifest way. V'chein, and also, secondly, simcha amitis hikasher ein la kol hagbalos. The truest type of simcha has no limitation. It has no definition. Harei shleimus hasimcha me'inish shelamayla ma'hasagas haseichel shel ha'adam hi, kasher in yezeh musag loy rak b'vchinas makeh bilvad, ela hu nimshach uba b'pnimiyas dafka. So the full simcha can only come not just from something that is higher from seichel, that is done with Mesiras Nefesh, but when this transcendent makifdike energy comes into pnimius via our seichel and our midas. Ubezem muvanatam, and from this we can understand the reason shesimcha sheibas hamayim, that the simcha that comes from drawing the water, sheteichna keteichen hasimcha ba me'inin hasukkah canal. And this is like the simcha that comes from the sukkah, and the sukkah is an Indian of makif, transcendence. Matchila beleil hasheni shel Sukkos, that this begins on the second night. Hainu la'achrei avodas l'kachtam lachem b'yem harishon, after the avodah of bringing the makif into the pnimi via the daled minim, that is done on the first day. Ki la'achrei zeh shapayel la'adam b'yem harishon al yidei daled haminim shahamakif shel hasukah nimshach lachem b'pnimiyas, because after a person effectuates on the first day through the daled minim that the makif of the sukkah should flow down lachem within b'pnimiyas, azay miskayim by belel beis de sukkos u'shaftem mayim b'sasam shelamayla mahaseichel. Only then could there be on the second night the drawing of the water with joy that transcends seichel. Shahavoida de Mesiras Nefesh shelamayla mahaseichel chayderes b'tarkol k'chaysev hapnimim u'maireres simcha amitis vigluya. So again, here we have the feedback loop. We have the acid reflux effect, where you have the taking of the makif into a pneumistic way through the daled minim, and then from this comes back in a reflux motion the higher level of simcha that transcends seichel and midas. In other words, there's sukkos, and the whole in of sukkah is makif, is transcendence. Then you have to take this makif and you have to bring it pnimi, and this is the in of the daled minim and the nanuim that always go to the heart. That's our minhag. Then from that comes on the second night a higher level of simcha amitis that comes from having taken the makiv into the pnimi and now pushing it back up to even a higher level. Because again, because Ein Seif has to mean Ein Seif. So it has to mean that it could even pierce and be and permeate the limited pneumistic kalim within us. And that's when you get to the higher level, the emesis simcha, the emesis makif, as it were. Now in Ches, the Rebbe says, "Va'afal pikein halacha hi." But nevertheless, the halacha is shegam b'yem harishon de sukkos haya nisuch hamayit. So even though Pi Chasidus we understand the second opinion, the Rebbe said we have to understand both opinions in Avodah. Now we understand the second opinion, but halacha l'maisa was done on the first day. So therefore, there was the drawing of the water before the Daled Min. The Kevan to be inim v'shafta mayim b'sasa move on shagam shivazu haisa b'simcha hamuteres. And so, since it had to be after mayim b'sasa, and it's understood that this drawing was done with the simcha that was permitted. And in the footnote here, the Rebbe explains that. That on Shabbos you can't blow the chatzaitres, but they were able to blow the chatzaitres when they drew the water on the first day, the first night of Yom Tov. The ma'acha shagam lefnei akiyum v'delakachtem yeshnat tekef meharega harishon shabelayla harishon pa'ula schach hasuka b'fchinas makif. Because even before you have the lakachtem, right away from the first minute that Sukkos begins, you already have the inyan of schach of the Sukkah, which is the inyan of Makiv. Shehi hasiba lesimchas hayantiv b'layla harishain, and that's the reason for the great simcha on the first night of Sukkos. Al kain gam oz shayach ha'inyan de simchas beis ha'she'eva. So it's already possible and plausible for there to be the simcha beis ha'she'eva that comes from the inyan of Makiv. Shetia simcha mishivas ubechinas hamayim shelamayla mehasagas hasechol. That there should be simcha that comes from the drawing of the waters that transcends sechol. However, the Rebbe says, but because sukkah, that means the simcha of the first night is only in the mode of makiv, of hovering, of something that transcends and surrounds us. Like one example that's given in Chassidus for makiv is like when a room is illuminated by sunlight. So that is the strongest type of illumination, but it's separate and apart from the room. The light is not coming from anything within the room. It's a transcendent energy, and it lights up the room, but when it goes away, it leaves the room untouched and unaffected. So the Rebbe says on the first night, because it's only in of Makiv, al kain gam hasimcha da'az eina b'shleimus ve'eina b'goli kokach. Therefore, the simcha is not complete and it is not revealed. V'davka la'achri havoided until as daled minim v'lakachtem lochem, and specifically and only after the avoid of netilas daled minim, taking it to you, bringing the makiv inside of you, hamshachas hamakiv b'pnimius, azai simchas beis ha'she'eva, he bimloi teikva, only then is the simcha complete in its strength. How does this express itself? Lahalacha lemaisa v'cholil v'shar klei shir. That in times of Beis Hamikdash, there was the chalil and the rest of the instruments. And this is a theme that the Rebbe returned to over and over again in his sichos on Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, that there's something about the second night that surpasses the first night. Tess. And now the Rebbe is going to show us this inyan of what we have now in Golos that we didn't have then in the Beis Hamikdash. Through this we'll understand Masha Achshav Bisman Golos, that now in the time of Golos, Hatchala Simchas Beis HaShe'eva Kiminag Yisrael Bekama Mekaymes Hi B'Layla Rishon Shel Sukkos. Today we start Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, the first night of Sukkos. Ikara Inyan Dam Shachas HaMakiv B'Pnimiyos Haya Bisman HaBayis, because the main inyan of bringing makif into pnimi was in the times of Beis Hamikdash. Be'ez she'elakus he'ira begoloi ubepnimius, v'havoida ha'isabika b'koiches ha'pnimiyim. Because in the Beis Hamikdash, Elokus irradiated in a revealed and in an inner way, and the avoid in the times of the Beis Hamikdash was in the main with the koiches hapnimiyim, with what people internalized and integrated within. Masha inkim bisman hagalos, in contradistinction in our time is man hagalos. Kasher oisayseinu loira inu goimer, we didn't see the great miracles with our own eyes. Harei hatcholas v'hakdamas havoida eina kol kach b'koiches hapnimiyim. So the beginning and the preface of the Avodah is not so much with the innermost koiches. Ela ikar ha'avodah v'haschalasa himitzad mesiras nefesh v'koiches makifim. The main Avodah and the beginning of everything begins with mesiras nefesh, with the koiches makifim. Another way of saying this is emuna pshuta. Ubepashtus. And the Rebbe says simply begins with Al Yevosh Mipnei HaMaligim. First of all, don't be cowed by those who mock and scorn. Heve az kanomer, kenesher, ketzvi, b'chulu, ka'aryeh. You should be as strong as a leopard and as swift as an eagle, or no, as swift as the deer, strong as a lion. What does it say about the nesher? I should have looked it up. I did not. I apologize. But the point is, Adam. When we go with seichel, that is a koich hapnimi, and over the Rebbe doubles back and says it's necessary to permeate the seichel and the midas. We cannot leave that behind, because then you don't have buy-in of the person. But at the same time, we can't lead with that. That can't be the main wind in our sails. It has to be mesiras nefesh. It has to be emuna pshuta. Memela, and therefore, eina nikar murgash ata kol kach ha'ilu v'yisron shel halayla hasheni de Sukkos. She'oz yeshna kvar hamshachas hamakiv b'pnimis al dei b'lakachtam lachem al pnei halayla harishon. So today, we don't feel so much the novelty of the second night, which is the incorporation of the makif into the pnimi, because now our modality is makif. That's what fuels us. First night, second night, and 100th night. Ella. But then the Rebbe says in brackets, but because everything about Torah is eternal, so today, just like the Rebbe showed the other way, the spiritual reason for the second opinion, even though it's not adopted lahalacha, here the Rebbe is doing the opposite. He's saying that it's true, we live in a different time, but this is still expressed what the novelty and the spectacular way in which the second day is higher than the first day is still expressed today in our time in the great simcha. Shebelel beis magdilim es simcha. We amplify the simcha the second day. Ad shetei gdoila min simcha shel leil aleph. Va'ad l'simcha ba'ifik hazeh, kilu kol inyan simcha beis hasheva hitcha b'leil beis. So much so that it appears as if the whole inyan of Simchas Beis Sheva only begins on the second night. So on one hand, the Rebbe is saying that today it's about Makif, so we don't have to wait for the Makif to be Nimshach into the Pnimi and then come back up in an amplified way for the second day. So we already have the great Simcha on the first day. That's on one hand. And on the other hand, since everything is Nitzchi, so there was an amplification of the Simcha in the Beis HaMikdash. It was then when they added the instruments. So it has to be by us also that on the second day there's an amplification.
Rivky,
Sorry.
I just want to understand the paragraph before that. Just want to understand. There's 3 levels, right? There's Makif, there's Pnimi, and then there's the
Makif as it was channeled through the Pnimi.
So that we experience in both. We experience the Makif and we channel Pnimi with Lov and Esrik to the heart.
Yeah.
What we don't experience is the 3rd level, right?
No. We're experiencing all 3 levels in that regard. But the Rebbe is drawing a distinction between the times of the Beis HaMikdash and our time now. We're on a more global level, not on the inyan of Makif Pnimi, Makif, meaning Sukkah, Dalid Minim, Sukkah, amplified way, but that in a very global way, the main way in which they, let's say, experienced Elokus was in an inyan of Pnimi. Masha Enkein, we experience it in a way of Makif, which the Rebbe is saying is the inyan of Mesiras Nefesh, Emunah Pshuta.
What happened to the 2nd level, though? Why are we skipping over the 2nd level?
We're not. We still do the nanuim and we still bring it to the heart and we still have the inyan of the makif as it comes down into the pnimi, and then how the pnimi elevates the makif on the second night. That's all true. But then the Rebbe takes it.
If I have to take the makif
zooms out and says on historically, there's a difference between the pervasive energy of the times of the Beis HaMikdash and the time of Golus.
Yeah,
so I get things.
Yeah, I get that. But if I have to take what is beyond me, the sukkah, the makif, or the libation of the whatever the
water.
The water. If I have to take that and bring it down to Mesiras Nefesh, no, how? That I shouldn't be intimidated by those who scoff. I should stand strong in my Yiddishkeit and all that. Now it becomes pnimi. It's internalized. So why aren't here the both levels?
Again, I think there's 2 different things going on. It's 2 different things. One is the Rebbe is drilling down on the idea that Makif has tremendous milas, but bringing it down, but Pnimius has tremendous milas, even though there are drawbacks to it, right? Because there are limitations, and Makif is all about infinity. That's one thing, that is a seder that has to happen, that Makif has to suffuse the Pnimi, and only then is there an even higher level of Makif that comes as a result of that. That's one thing. So what you're saying about having to bring down the Mesiras Nefesh in our lives and in our seichel and in our midas, that's all true, and that all remains. Separate column, let's say, conceptually, is the different eras and the global modality of serving Hashem. And that while in the Beis HaMikdash, it was because of the Gilui, Elokus, it was more through the Pneumistic Kelim. For us, since we don't have that, it's more the Makif energy, which the Rebbe here translates as Mesiras Nefesh.
Okay, thank you.
If anybody has something to add, please, because maybe I'm not explaining it properly or fully, so please jump in. On the other hand, the last thing the Rebbe said was, okay, we understand that we're living in a different time. And so from that perspective, the first night and the second night are not so different. But because everything in Torah is eternal, so there has to be a way in which this expresses itself. What's this? The way in which the second night is higher than the first night still expresses itself today in the time of Golos. When we're not operating through our koiches pnimiyim so much that we see the greater advantage of the second night in that way. Rebbe said, how do we see it today? We see that there's a difference in the second day from the first day, and that is the again, sorry, I got myself mixed up. Give me a second. The Rebbe says, Shebelel Beis, on the second day, we amplify the Simcha, so much so that it almost seems like the whole Simchas Beis HaShe'eva started on the second day. On the other hand, Aval Mahai Taima Gufa Nimtza, but for this very reason, Sheyeshna Ilui B'Simchas Beis HaShe'eva B'Zman Hazel Gabe Simchas Beis HaShe'eva Sheb'Zman Habayis. For this very reason, we find that in general, there's an Ilui, there's a way in which Simchas Beis HaShe'eva in our time is higher than the Simchas Beis HaShe'eva of the time of the Beis HaMikdash. Keshem shemavor b'negel in mesiras nefesh atzmai shebezman hagolus kasher gilui hakoyches hapnimim eina matzu kol kach koyach hamesiras nefesh hu begolu yoyse masher bezman habayis. Just like it's explained in relation to the Indian of mesiras nefesh, that in the times of golus, when we don't have the manifest internal koyches found so much, so the koyach of mesiras nefesh is revealed in much greater fashion than the time of the Beis Hamikdash. Al derech zehu b'nagei l'simcha shemitzad avodazu. So this is also reflected in the simcha that comes as a result of Mesiras Nefesh. Shehi simcha denisach hamayim, which is in general the idea of mayim, which is bereft of tam vadas canal. Shebizman agolos zui simcha nalis yotzer mitzad etzem hanefesh. Because in Golus, it's not about our koiches pnimim, it's not about our seichel, it's not about our midas, it's about Mesiras Nefesh, and this is even a higher level of simcha that comes from the etzem hanefesh, from the etzem haneshama. So we're missing the Geluyim, we're missing the way in which it would inform our seichel and midas. We're missing the way in which, when it's siphoned through our seichel and midas, it would create this ricochet effect back to the makif and make the makif even greater. But the Rebbe says, but there's something that surpasses all of this, and that is the Mesiras Nefesh that comes straight from the etzem hanefesh, from the etzem haneshama.